So if we are ready for our next panel today, I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of Turkish delegation and Ministry of Environment and Urbanization of Turkey with a new title added to climate change. And here we have a very strong panel today. As you know, our topic is carbon pricing and the reflections of carbon pricing in Turkey. I have 4 participants today, but one of them will join online. And to introduce them briefly, on the very left side, I have Mr. Volkan Tekin, and he is actually the Sustainability Director at Tüpraş, which is one of the largest, actually the largest refinery in Turkey. And then we have Mr. Ramazan Aslan, and he is with Life Energy in Turkey with a vast experience in voluntary carbon markets and as well as strategic carbon consultancy and climate consultancy with large manufacturing plants, as well as bilaterals and the ministries and public sector. And I have Mr. İzzet Arı on my left, and Mr. Arı has probably the longest research experience in Turkey regarding climate change, finance and climate change management. He is a researcher, a professor from Social Sciences University of Ankara. So again, I'd like to welcome our panelists today. I just want to make a very short intro to carbon pricing issues in Turkey. As many of you could have been aware already, Turkey has some long experience of voluntary carbon markets, and regarding the project-based markets and developing these credits from Turkey, actually we have developed some sense of carbon pricing, where the reciprocation was not actually as the demand market in Turkey, mostly outside Turkey, but that gave Turkey a chance to understand the role of carbon pricing in mitigating climate change. And starting 2016, Turkey has become an active member of PMR, Partnership for Market Readiness Program of the World Bank, where the preparations started with building an MRV system in the country and researching for possible options for ETS markets and associated topics. Also, we have a long experience of carbon disclosure project for the publicly listed companies in Turkey. Since 2010, more than 50 publicly listed companies in Turkey have been responding to CDP. And for the last 3-4 years, carbon pricing has become a very important part of the response. We see that the players in the CDP respondents, they are actually exploring the options for internal carbon pricing, TCFD, to take more responsibility along their process of responding to CDP. So with that short introduction, I now would like to start with Mr. İzzet Arı, and because he has this vast theory of the carbon pricing, and he knows the issue, and recently we know that he has been working on the long-term strategies, net zero, and the role of carbon pricing in achieving net zero targets or long-term targets. So I'd like to invite him to present his topic and tell us more about the role of carbon pricing in net zero.
Thank you, Yıldız Hanım. It's a great opportunity for me to be here, and it's a very big conference for us, Conference of Parties of UNFCCC. And it's so lucky because this meeting, the main agenda is the Article 6 is a carbon pricing. I know that the audience is so happy to listen us about the carbon pricing, but I want to give a very brief presentation about what is the carbon pricing. I assume that the homogeneity of the audience is not the same. It's a very, very brief presentation. I want to share with you what is the carbon pricing, how can we use the carbon tax and cap and trade in our economies or societies, and how we achieve the long-term emission targets. For example, last month, Turkey announced that Turkey will achieve net zero targets by 2053. It's a very big agenda for all of us. But the reason why do we put a price on carbon? Because there are two costs there. The first one is damage cost, damage by the climate change itself. The other one is the controlling cost. What's the controlling cost? It might be mitigation, it might be adaptation, or developing technology or transfer something. But in the carbon pricing issue, the important, maybe laser point there, the important point is knowing the social cost of carbon. How can we calculate or estimate the social cost of carbon? If you look at the damage itself, therefore we need to overcome this damage. How can we solve this problem? Controlling emissions, in other words, technically mitigation of emissions. Actually, countries or some stakeholders already familiar about the carbon pricing under the Kyoto Protocol, CDM, joint implementation or emission trading. It's not a new subject, but Article 6, I will try to share all this issue at the end of my presentation. It's a new subject. How can we understand and implement Article 6 in the context of the carbon pricing? Very shortly, the aim of the carbon pricing is the minimizing the overall cost, the cost itself, the controlling emissions. And it might be equalizing the marginal abatement cost or reducing overall emissions in a society. But in the context of the UNFCCC and the carbon pricing, we are looking at the overall emissions for the global emissions, and global marginal abatement cost should be equal. For this is at the global level, we are searching now a global or international emission trading system. There are some taxes or cap and trade. Sometimes it's called cap and trade emission trading itself, but it's technically cap and trade. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the carbon trades and carbon taxes? I try to put some advantages and disadvantages of carbon taxes, but when we look at some brief information about the carbon taxes, one of the biggest advantage of the carbon tax is overcoming the market failure while putting a tax on emissions, the putting tax for the polluters, not the consumers. But when we implementation side, the polluters turns to everyone. Everyone pays for these taxes. But in terms of the limiting the cost and monitoring, it's easily monitoring because the government or independent body inspect all these emissions via taxes. And the last advantage of the carbon taxes is rising revenue. But the important thing is here, the rising revenue is, how can we use the revenues collected from the taxes? If we use in the conventional system, it's not okay. You should go to low carbon technologies for the sake of overall emission mitigation. What are some disadvantages? Uncertainty impact, because government just put a tax, but nobody knows about the overall effect to reach the zero targets or not. And competitiveness effects, always small and medium-sized entrepreneurs or households are suffering from the competitiveness effect because they are not competitive in a society. And the cap and trades, these are some advantages. The main motivation itself is equalizing the marginal abatement cost and create an incentive pool to transformation societies, but does not need too much detail because in some factories or institutions or some maybe sectors itself collect the information, but submit the government itself. The direction from the information from the bottom to the government side. For disadvantage, the biggest advantage of the cap and trade is guarantee for the target because cap already there. We have to reach this cap throughout the target. And disadvantage is uncertainty price, always uncertainty. It depends on some external shocks like COVID-19 still exist, and geographical distribution that might be depend on your weather conditions or some regional development disparities, etc. And revenue rising, it's not very explicitly written how can the revenue rise from the carbon trading issue. These are some important points. When we look at the last a few slides about Article 6, I was in the Article 6 discussion before the Paris Climate Conference. That was the turning point for all of us because the Paris Agreement adopted there. And when we look at the first, when I was first iterative reading on the Article 6, I couldn't find any word like pricing or emission trading, nothing. But there is a carbon pricing inside implicitly. How can we read the carbon pricing? How can we continue our lesson learned from the Kyoto Protocol flexible mechanism? And how can we achieve the 1.5 degree to overall targets of the Paris Agreement? Actually, I tried to formalize the 3 points of the Paris Agreement, Article 6. The first one is the cooperative approach, Article 6.2. That's similar to emission trading, international emission trading, but the cooperative action is essential to create international mitigation outcomes. It's important because it's a kind of tool or physical certificate to prove that emission already reduced, okay? The other point is Article 6.4 about the kind of carbon clean development mechanism. It's about some overall mitigation emissions for reaching again Paris climate goal, and Article 6.8 about the non-market mechanisms or non-market approach. It is called non-market because when I called the carbon pricing inside the Article 6, but Article 6 not only cover the carbon pricing. This is a non-market approach like a climate aid or humanitarian aid, like a development aid from developed countries or advanced economies to developing countries or least developed countries. Why? Because climate change is a global problem and we need a global language or global rule, and this is the global objective. Okay, thank you for me. Thank you for listening for me. Yes.
Thank you so much, Izzet. This was really a very in-depth but very brief, concise way of explaining us the carbon pricing and the aspects of it. Now I'd like to actually ask a few questions to Ramazan because there is now a new challenge, especially faced by Turkey in terms of carbon pricing, and that is the carbon border adjustment mechanisms by under EU Green Deal. With Turkey being being a large exporter to EU and under the risk of this new pricing mechanism, because this is indirectly actually putting a price on carbon, I'd like to talk about this with Ramazan. And recently, what is the reaction of Turkish industry, and in particular, of course, the reaction of exporters to CBAM, and what do you think is happening right now?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gedis. As you know, we are the first consultants on the climate change in Turkey since we started in 2009. And it was really difficult to work in the environment of the unique position of Turkey in the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol, because Turkey is somehow in Annex 1 country, but also not Annex B. So always we need to explain that to our clients that it was the voluntary market was the only mechanism that we can work on the carbon issues. And there was no other thing that we can do. And because of that, up so far, we were only dealing with the carbon offset developers, with the renewable energy companies mostly. Indeed, we were always talking to the industry participants, and we were always saying that now everybody is going to the low carbon economy, and we should be prepared about that. But I think there should be a clear message as a regulation, or as a, for example, the high-level decision to allow the industries to go that way. Because of that, it was not the main issue of the industries to go about to lower carbon production and the economy so far. But what we could see that indeed, until the CBAM or introduction of the carbon border adjustment of the EU, there was lots of things happening. Indeed, the most important development was the renewable energy investments of the industries, especially they were started to build the solar power plants on their rooftops and try to supply their energy from the renewable energy sources. But their main driver and the motivation for this was, in fact, the reducing their costs mostly, not the climate perspective, I can say. The main difference between that time to now, after the introduction of the CBAM, I can say that now the main focus is the carbon. Mm-hmm. Because now they can see that it can be a big disadvantage considering their competitivity when to export their production to the EU. So now they try to make a new strategy, a long-term strategy, and to bring it to their focus of their management, I can say. So, for example, we are now, the industries coming to us to ask for the consultancy to develop the climate strategy for them, which involves some reduction targets, mostly for 2030 and maybe the carbon neutrality by 2050, I can say, which also includes the implementation of the renewable energy, energy efficiency measures, and all other things. I can see and I can say that now there is a big interest for this kind of the consultancies after the introduction of this CBAM. And now all of the, particularly exporters to the, mostly the companies who are exporting to the EU are now really trying to do a lot to be prepared on time and do not lose their competitiveness, I can say.
Thank you. And despite this alert in the industry and the intention to develop preparation for CBAM, I understand that there are still some major missing issues. And what are they?
Yeah, there are, I think, still some capacities needs to be built for the industry side. Because, as I said, in this compatible new and Turkey is very recently ratified the Paris Agreement. So, in general, the understanding of the climate issues or the climate pricing and the mechanism is not so well in the industry. So, they start to now understand what is it exactly and how they can be prepared well. And, for example, still it is not clear for them whether scope 1 emissions is included or not, or scope 2 emissions, or when the scope 3 emissions will be included to their carbon footprinting for CBAM mechanism, I can say. And they, for example, ask whether carbon, if they offset their emissions with the carbon offsets, or if they buy electricity from renewable energy certificates, whether they will be able to exempt from the CBAM mechanism or not. And we generally say this is completely different issues. Yeah, they are also a kind of the carbon pricing instruments, carbon offsets, but indeed carbon allowances, emission allowance is something different. And it seems to be directly linked with the national emission system. And so, for example, this kind of the issues about what is the instruments in their hands, and then how they can reach the desired emissions they in their targets, it still needs to be clarified, I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, and thinking of the impact of carbon pricing on the industry, I mean, I think we all sense that there may be some negative consequences because it comes with some risk. But I think there may be some advantages, some potential opportunities in that sense. What are the risks and opportunities in complying with CBAM, and what would the industry expect from the government in developing further opportunities?
Yeah, indeed, as you said, when we talk about particularly, for example, renewable energy, we can see that renewable energy costs are now the cheapest costs compared to the other alternatives. So indeed, going low carbon production is not only is a thing that the factories can do it for being more climate friendly, but also is very good for the cost perspective. So they will be able to cover their electricity costs with much feasible investments. By this, they can be also it can also increase their competitiveness, I can say. This is, I can say, the biggest advantage. And the second, as you know, all other nations, especially developed nations, are preparing to the net carbon zero economy. So to not be able to back behind and just lag behind this competition, you need to act fast. You need to decarbonize your production and all your process. So if you just act as soon as possible, then you can reach that target as soon as in a short time. These are the main advantages, but the competitive risk still maybe the industries need to do a lot and to invest a lot to become low carbon production companies, I can say. So they may it may bring some more financial stress to their economies, especially in the post-COVID times when all these commodities prices are increasing. It is becoming a bit difficult to make a decision on such investments maybe. So this is a kind of risk, and which is the mostly for the cost-related risk, I can say. But in the end, I think the advantage is becoming overwhelming. It is becoming much more important and bigger. This is my interpretation of the risk and the advantages. And regarding the expectation from the government, I think the first they really want to be sure what would be the details of the CBAM mechanism, well, how it will be implemented, how all these detailed issues will be done. I mean, it needs to be clarified. For example, reporting, who will be allowed to report, and how it will be audited, when they will be, and all other infrastructural things needs to be clarified. They expect first that, and maybe the second, they expect from government to negotiate this mechanism as much as possible in advantage of the Turkish economy, because when, for example, the high carbon allowances prices will be applied to Turkish economy, maybe it will be too much.
Yeah.
So they expect more balanced approach.
Maybe a gradual phasing
approach.
in the process rather than jumping in without
definitely
sufficient capacity or economic advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe they, for example, if it's possible, they still are insistent to allow using the carbon offset, at least for some portion, for this mechanism, for example. Main expectation of the industry from the government is that, I can say. Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. This was very helpful. And so far we have, heard from our experts on, what the carbon pricing is, the advantages, disadvantages, and particularly this new challenge CBAM and how it would impact the economy in the short run. Maybe it's now time to listen to practitioners. And first we have Mr. Volkan Tekin, and he'll tell us his experience of carbon pricing and sustainability and climate work at Tüpraş, which is the largest refinery in Turkey.
Thank you, Gediz Hanım. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session. I'm Dr. Volkan Tekin from Turkish Petroleum Refineries Corporation Head Office. working as a sustainability and climate change coordinator since 2011. Today, I will give brief information about our experiences on PMR projects launched in 2013 in Turkey as a participant. Also, I will give some information about the Tüpraş sustainability activities in scope of climate change. Before start my presentation, I would like to thank you, Minister of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change for giving this chance and having me here. When we look at the general overview of the Tüpraş, we are providing Turkey's energy nearly for 66 years, and our petroleum product market share in Turkey 51%, and our refining capacity in Turkey is 75%. We are one of the most complex refineries in Turkey, especially Mediterranean region, and also among the export record holders, we are the first place in the category of chemicals. Since privatization, we invested $7 billion. Most of the Turkish participants know that we are the largest industrial company of Turkey, so that we are Europe's 7th, world's 13th largest refinery. We have 4 refineries in different regions of Turkey. Our crude oil capacity is 30 million tons, and we have nearly 60,000 employees. As I mentioned, we have 4 refineries in Turkey, in İzmit, Kırıkkale, and Batman refinery. Turkish petroleum product needs, Tüpraş meets the 55% of Turkish petroleum product needs, and our storage capacity with OPET, 57%. When we look at the complexity means that if you have more process, the complexity gets higher. İzmit and İzmir refinery are the most complex refineries of Tüpraş, Kırıkkale, and Batman, the following ones. You can see that their national complexity also storage capacity. Today's topic is carbon pricing, and I will interconnect with the carbon pricing and PMR phase 2 that we experienced between 2019 and 2020, run by Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change. Under phase 2, 6 components were studied, but during the phase 1, which was started in 2013, it was about more capacity building and raising awareness and analytic studies. Also, minister representatives have more information than me. During the phase 2, climate change, law and ETS regulation was one of the components. Cap allocation plans for pilot emission trading system, another one, emission trading system simulation, register software, Paris Agreement Article 6, also is that and Ramazan mentioned, and communication strategy were the components of the phase 2. Under these components, there were also subcategories, subcomponents. What were they? They were the draft climate law. We studied with all participants draft climate law of Turkey, also draft emission trading system regulation, draft institutional of infrastructure, carbon offset registration, year-based emission projects according to the sector, ETS cap determination, which is very important for sectors, sectoral allocation plans. Also, during the project, different models were used for energy times macro model use, and for the other industrial sectors, marginal abatement cost approach was used. Turkish ETS simulation, this is also online simulation tool, ETS capacity building gaining experience, and which is the important article of Paris Article 6 assessment, how Turkey will be affected, also will affect the other parties. This was also studied during the PMR project. And also this last one, awareness and communication is very important tool to gain, to raise the awareness in society, also in the companies. What we have learned as Tüpraş, I can divide these into 4 categories. We learned legal basis importance, terminology, ETS design parameters, and governance. Under legal basis, we learned that climate law is really necessary for the carbon pricing issues and to implement detailed some carbon policies. ETS regulation is very important. If you don't have any ETS regulation, you cannot implement these kind of issues regulation, but you can do only voluntarily if you don't have any NTS regulation. And supporting sub legislation is legislation are very important to provide extra information to the companies or the institutions. When we look at the terminology side, it is also very vital for all of us, because if you don't know the terminology, you cannot communicate easily. So that as all participants, as Tüpraş also we participate most of the components, we learn the terminology so that we easily negotiate and communicate with the partners, also with the policy makers. Cap and trade approach, so that this terminology is very important for all of the for all developing countries that want to implement this kind of carbon pricing or carbon mechanism. And also we learned negotiation language, so that you have to explain your requirements detailed to be met by the policymakers. ETS design parameters, it is not only price emission trading system, it is a big design, structure design, so that you have to know that which sector will be covered under emission trading system, which mechanism, carbon pricing mechanism or cap determination mechanism will you use. The grandfathering on the benchmarking, they are very important tools, so that carbon market terms, financial terms, or also technical terms we learned, they are very beneficial for us. Also, governance part will play an important role under the implementation of or preparation for the emission trading system, because you have to define the responsibilities of the institution very well, very deeply, and also you have to implement organization structure according to your government or your company's needs, and you have to comply with the targets with this organizational structure. These are the main benefits or main experiences that we gained during the PMR projects. From here, I want to jump to what we do as Tüpraş. Tüpraş is a refining company. Most of you know that these are also a roadmap for all partners. UN SDGs, and UN SDGs 13 topic is climate action. Regarding climate action, what we do as Tüpraş. Tüpraş's sustainability program kicked off in 2008. During that time, we have achieved a lot of results and a lot of projects. When we look at them, nearly 500 energy efficiency projects we completed, and we saved 35,000 terajoule and 2.4 million tons CO2 emissions. As you know, we are in energy intense sector, so that energy efficiency is very, very important for mitigation of carbon emissions, also GHG emissions. We increased our solid waste recovery nearly 12%. Our energy intensity dropped nearly 21 points, and we decreased our fresh water use nearly 45%, and we increased the female employees, and we dedicated occupational health and safety training nearly 1.2 million work hours, and also female representation in senior mid-level management increased 17%. You can also reach our sustainability report via Tüpraş website. Also, when we share, if we have a chance to share our presentation, you can click on this part. What we have done last year, 2020, as you know, 2020 was the very difficult year for all of us. But in aspect of ESG perspective achievements, we get some awards. One of them is Industry Energy Efficiency Project Competition in Turkey. We call it Çevre competition. Kırıkkale Refinery won the second place. İzmit Refinery won the Waste Management Award in Sustainable Business Award. We achieved 64% water recycle ratio and solid waste recovery nearly 60%. We also we have social support during the pandemic, so that we quickly coordinate 60 volunteer teachers using 3D printers in robotic coding classes, and 10,000 wiser masks were produced for healthcare workers. And also you can see our governance excellence here, female representation, upper and mid-level management, corporate governance rating nearly 9.58. Previously, I mentioned energy efficiency is very important. In last year, what we have done as to push for energy efficiency project. With these energy efficiency projects, we saved lots of tons carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. As you see, in 2018, we nearly saved 240,000 tons CO2 with our energy efficiency project. After a point, if you are an energy-based company, there is a limitation to make extra energy efficiency projects, so that you can see the following years it decreased. And the circular economy approach, zero waste approach, you also hear that it's also important for sustainability studies and climate change studies. We have 6 steps for our waste management. As you know, waste reduction in processing is the important one, a main tool. And the other one is separation of the waste according to their types, and waste storage, landing, handling, sending to waste recovery, recording waste, sent to recovery or disposal, and employee training, social responsibility. These are 6 steps of our circular economy zero waste approach. Also in Turkey, zero waste approach is very common, and we take this approach as our guide. What kind of projects we achieved? Sludge dewatering, sandblasting waste, refractory waste, oil waste, and deactivated carbon projects has been completed in Tüpraş. They are very important for circular economy and industrial symbiosis projects. And the other one is R&D projects. R&D and innovation are very, very crucial for climate change, new technologies, so that as Tüpraş, our R&D center participates lots of Horizon, EU Horizon project. You see these projects, most of them are Horizon projects, EU funded. I can share some of them. For example, we have microjet project with TÜBİTAK. This aims to sustainable economic biojet fuel using micro-arc biomass. And also we have Cosmos project with different partners, major partners. This project aims to carbon dioxide waste to convert the chemicals and fuels. And the other one is metal organic frameworks for air project. It aims to develop innovative absorbent to capture CO2, and also we will have a demo scale in our İzmit refinery, and the Fudipo Industries and Coral is the other projects of our Tüpraş R&D Center regarding Horizon project that support the climate change studies. These are all from my side. Thank you for your participation and listening.
Thank you so much. So as a refinery plant, I understand that you have done really a lot to reduce your emissions and to address the role of carbon pricing in your future strategy. Last but not least, we have Mr. Fatih Memiş joining us from Istanbul today. Mr. Memiş is at Arçelik, and he is going to tell us about the internal carbon pricing process at Arçelik. Just to introduce you briefly, Arçelik is one of the largest household appliances manufacturers of the world, and they're developing technology and they're also very environmental conscious. So I just want to give the word to Mr. Fatih Memiş now, and he'll tell us about what Arçelik has been doing in carbon pricing.
Thank you, Gediz Hanım. It is a pleasure to be here and talk about Arçelik carbon pricing mechanism. Just check a visual check. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can perfectly see it, but I think you just need to switch to slide mode. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, my name is Fatih Memiş. I am working as energy specialist in Arçelik. Arçelik is a household appliances and consumer electronics producers. We have more than 40,000 employees and 9 factories all over the world. Today, I will talk about what is internal carbon pricing, what are the main internal carbon pricing mechanisms, why we are using internal carbon pricing, and how we implement it in our organization. First of all, we all know about policy-based carbon pricing mechanisms. Also, İzzet Bey give some information about these policy-based carbon pricing mechanisms like ETS and carbon taxes. These are driven by governments or public authorities, and there are some regulations and rules. On the other hand, internal carbon pricing is a voluntary mechanism, and companies, financial institutions, and even some public organizations apply it internally. It allows organizations to assess the financial impacts of their carbon emissions and drive low carbon investments, drive energy efficiency, and navigate GHG regulations in their organizations. Here, I would like to share some numbers from the latest CDP report from 2020. According to this CDP report, in the last 5 years, there is an 80% increase in the number of companies planning or using internal carbon price. As you see, there are more than 800 companies. They are using internal carbon price now, and there are more than 1,100 companies. They are planning to anticipate it within 2 years. Besides corporate companies, financial institutions have also begun using internal carbon pricing to assess their project portfolios. For example, some financial institutions are using a shadow price to prioritize low carbon investments and avoid climate-related risks. There are 2 main internal carbon pricing mechanisms. One of them is shadow price. In shadow price, there is a theoretical price on carbon. There is no real fee or real charge. Companies use this theoretical shadow price in the life cycle feasibilities of their investments. And by this way, they prioritize low carbon investments. I will give more information about this shadow pricing mechanism, and I will show some examples, because in Arçelik, we are also using shadow pricing mechanism. The other mechanism is internal carbon fee. This is also very popular in the world. In this mechanism, this is also called as internal taxes or carbon fees. In this mechanism, companies charge their factories, departments, business units for their emissions. At the end of the year, according to the factories' emissions, they charge their emissions, and there is a real revenue in this mechanism, and companies use this revenue in their carbon reduction projects, like energy efficiency projects, renewable energy projects, green electricity purchasing, etc. As I said, we are using shadow carbon pricing in our whole organization, and there are 4 main goals why we are using it. One of them is transforming our culture of our economy, our company, transforming the culture of our company. We are a global company. We have 28 factories all over the world. Most of our factories are in developing countries like Turkey, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. And each year, with organic and inorganic growings, we are using more and more energy. In this regard, our starting point was, how can we make the impact of our energy consumption visible? What is the amount of pollution that is associated with our energy consumption? This was the main question before we start this internal shadow pricing mechanism. Actually, internal carbon pricing translates carbon into a financial language because most of the employees don't understand carbon language. It is similar that I am doing this presentation in Chinese and there is no interpreter in the room. So most probably, most of the audience wouldn't understand what I am talking about. By switching to a price on carbon means being able to speak about the impact of our operations in a metric that everybody understands in the company. And this metric is money. So internal carbon price is a very good tool to increase awareness about carbon reduction, and educate our employees. The second main goal is supporting the transition to a low carbon economy. And of course, this is one of the biggest one of the biggest goal of these internal carbon pricing mechanisms. Because when we implement shadow carbon pricing in our company, in our organization, this mechanism makes emission-intensive businesses, inefficient equipments more costly, and warn companies to avoid them. So by implementing shadow price, companies invest on more energy efficient and low carbon technologies. The other main goal is navigating GHG regulations. Today, we don't have any regulation regarding policy-based carbon pricing mechanisms like ETS and carbon tax. But what about the future? Today, a total of 65 carbon pricing instruments are now in operation around the world. Probably, most of the governments will have to implement ETS or carbon tax in their countries in the near future. Volkan mentioned about PMR project in Turkey. PMR project was a preliminary step for this in Turkey. So companies that track their greenhouse gas emissions and implement an internal carbon price are better prepared for a regulatory feature in which carbon is priced. And the last one, responding to the concerns of our investors and consumers. In addition to direct benefits from carbon pricing, investors are starting to prioritize companies that are leaders in corporate sustainability. And they are increasingly investing in such companies. For example, we are reporting various sustainability indexes like MSCI, Dow Jones, FTSE4Good. And in all of these indexes, we are answering carbon price related questions. So this is also a very important aspect. So how we are using internal carbon pricing in Arçelik? As Arçelik, we are using a shadow price, as I said. And as a shadow price, we use 50 euros per ton CO2 emissions. And we use this price in the lifetime cost analysis of our investments. These investments should have a capex minimum 50k euros and should have a power capacity minimum 50 kilowatts. As you see, we are focusing relatively middle and big size investments because we know that if there is a huge energy consumption, there is also huge energy efficiency potential. The internal price of carbon implemented in Arçelik is a uniform but flexible. What does it mean? We are using a single price. It is 50 euros in this year. It is uniform in all our factories, but it is flexible because we are updating this cost each year. For example, last year in 2020, we are using 30 euros per 1 ton CO2 emission. So let's see an example here. In this table, for example, we are purchasing an air compressor. All of us have air compressors in our factories. And our purchasing team takes 3 quotations from 3 different companies. Firstly, when we look at the first investment costs, let me open a pointer. When we look at the first investment cost, the option C company is the cheapest one. Their compressor is cheaper than the others. But we are also looking the operation cost of these compressors, because when we purchase these compressors, during the lifetime, it has some energy costs and some maintenance costs, some operational costs. And in most of the investment, these operation cost is much, much higher than the first investment cost. So we are also evaluating the operation cost of our investments. After evaluating the life cycle cost, option C becomes the most expensive one because it is an inefficient compressor. And after evaluating operation cost, option A becomes the most feasible one. But after that, one step further, we also implement shadow price to our feasibility table. And here we are calculating the life cycle CO2 emissions of these compressors and apply 50 euros per each ton CO2 emission. After this cost calculation, as you see, option 1 is the most feasible one in our example here. This methodology drives us to purchase the compressor, which is more energy efficient, even it is more expensive. We apply this methodology in all our investments within the criteria shown above, like boiler investments, chiller investments, and energy system investment, etc. Here, I will show another example. This is an interesting example. Normally, when a company plans to make an energy investment, and let's say there are two alternatives on the table. One of them is a natural gas cogeneration system, and the other one is a renewable system, for example, solar PV. In this case, shadow price is very useful tool when looking for the answer to the question, which one should I invest on? But in our case, we have only one alternative. This is the solar PV because we don't consider fossil-based energy systems no longer. And here we assessed lifetime payback period of rooftop solar system with shadow price. Here in our feasibility table, we also implement shadow price and calculate shadow carbon cost of this actually not carbon cost, carbon gain of this project. And when we look at the results, if we don't put shadow carbon price here, the payback time is 5.5 years. But when we apply shadow carbon price, the payback time decreased to 4 years for this solar PV system. This is sometimes very important. This is very necessary to go below a certain payback time threshold in some companies to convince the top management in budget approval process. So this methodology works very good in such situations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Memiş. So this was really an in-depth and real practice of carbon pricing from a large company perspective. Now I'd like to invite everyone to raise any questions, any issues, or any comments to our panelists. Please. And if you could also introduce yourself, that would be very good.
My name is Kathy Orlando. I have stated that I'm only asking a question because nobody else is asking.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
I was waiting for somebody to ask a question. And thank you. So Kathy Orlando, Canada. In Canada, we have an incrementally rising price on carbon pollution to the consumer. This is a separate system for the big industries. And all the money is returned equitably to citizens, regardless of income, regardless of carbon footprint. And the system is called climate income in Europe, and it's called carbon fee and dividend on the other side of the ocean, of the ocean. So I'm wondering if any thought has ever been given to a consumer price on carbon that returns the money back to the people in Turkey. So thank you.
I don't know if, I think, would you, yeah, please go ahead, and I'm sure that you may have a good answer to this.
Yeah, I think it was okay. I try to follow some measures in Canada. I follow also your last election and some update or ambitious target for the NDC and long-term strategies. Yes, you are right. The revenue is important because the income level of the society is not the same. Therefore, all the producer and consumer, not only for consumer, but also producer. You know that some of the initiative called Just Transition or similar one in EU called the Social Climate Fund to support vulnerable societies. How can we support? In terms of the climate change, the image of the climate change, the disadvantaged groups and some minor groups really affected, and their degree is different than the other parts of the society. The governments or countries need to support those society. What is the source of finance? Is always Global Environmental Facility, Green Climate Fund, or multilateral? No, it should be sustainable. We have to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, the first part. Second, while reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, we have to create some sources to support the disadvantaged or vulnerable groups. It's a very difficult, like a Rubik's Cube, but we have to do that. In Turkey, it's implicitly inside for supporting the low-income groups, because we are collecting taxes, it's a general budget, some social funds, social not transfer exist, but in terms of the climate change, it's not explicitly announced, but after some periods, I think is during the reaching our net zero emissions, we will hear these explicit announcement from our Turkish side. Thank you. I hope I will answer more questions. If not, I will continue. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, please? If you could also introduce yourself.
So hello, my name is Marin Chalaria from France. And I just wanted to say thank you for speaking about carbon pricing, because not every pavilion is doing it. So I'm glad you did it. So it's not really a question, just a thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And any other comments or questions? Please.
I was wondering if the refineries in Turkey will be impacted by the methane rule, or the hope to reduce methane emissions by fixing leaks and minimizing discharges, or is it something that's kind of in hand already with you?
I can thank you for your question. I can say that methane emissions are not very common emissions for refineries. Methane emissions are very common for upstream, not downstream, because we don't get crude oil from the land. We only buy the crude oil and refine this crude oil to the petroleum products, so that we only affected morely CO2 emissions, not methane emissions.
So we can say that it is within your scope 3 emissions upwards.
We can say like that, but it is not easy to calculate scope 3 emissions for refineries, because sometimes you don't know where you get this crude oil, and you can get this crude oil from somewhere else, but the supplier has to give some information to calculate these scope 3 emissions. But under scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, we don't take into account methane emissions so much. We take into account CO2 emissions more.
And I think this brings us back to the discussion of net zero emissions and the description, the definition, and the role of scope 3 emissions in reaching net zero. We know that it is now a discussion among the experts to which level the scope 3 emissions should be accounted in net zero and by whom. This is also a common discussion, I would like to say, in Turkey, and all experts and industries are now trying to understand how they will account for the for the scope 3 emissions, especially the upstream part. And hopefully there will be more clarification for that from the international authorities and practitioners. But if anyone has any comments regarding net zero emissions and the role of scope 3 emissions in net zero, we'd like to hear that as well. Please go ahead. There's a young lady over there. Oh, you were not trying to ask a question. Okay, sorry. I thought you raised your hand. No, it's totally fine. Any other questions or comments? So I think we are also due for our time here, and thank you so much for participating today, for being here. And I'd like to thank you also on behalf of our panelists. And I also would like to thank our panelists who traveled all the way here, and Mr. Fatih Memiş, who waited there after hours to join the panel. Thank you so much.